It's the Joe Show. Good morning, and welcome to the Joe Show with me, Joe. So this is the show where I get up in the morning and read an article and then report on it. Jumping right into today's article, let's get to it. It is entitled, Where to Worry About Catching COVID-19 and Where Not to. So I was trying to keep it with content that's not related to the coronavirus and COVID-19, the current pandemic, but this article was sent to me by a friend, so I'm going to review it. This is by someone named Faye, Flam, published May 15th. So the article itself is overall a pretty positive article. The author talks a lot about where the virus can spread and where it can't spread. It's supposed to be a very positive thing. Like, hey, you don't have to worry about this, but let's read this and figure out if this is positive or not. Because as this is an opinion, I kind of have an opinion on this particular article. So it starts out by talking about each virus has a unique pattern of spread, and that new studies have come in giving us actual real data on how the virus is spreading, which is important because if we're just making models, that's not real data. We need the real data on this virus. So we have some real data on how the virus is spreading. There's two drivers of spread of the disease, which are close contact and crowding in closed spaces, says Muj Civic, a virologist at the University of St. Andrews in the UK. He points to spreading through homeless shelters, nursing homes, and other places where people are crowded with many others. Spreads through people's households and meat-packing plants, especially in the US. Civic has been collecting and reviewing papers from around the world on disease transmission, and he says there are some trends emerging. Or she, I guess it's a she, my bad. Spending time dining together, being in public transportation, increases the risk of spreading the disease. But going to the market briefly for 5 minutes or a transient encounter while you walk or run past someone, those are low risks. The studies that she's quoting are coming from China, Singapore, and Taiwan, and a little bit of US. Where they've done a lot of thorough contact tracing, which is where they're getting a lot of the data from, is contact tracing. The article then goes on to talk about how the U.S. has completely failed in doing any contact tracing, or really doing much contact tracing, which is really sad. But Civic said that people often ask her how this disease could be so transmissible if it takes closed environments or close contact to spread. That particular statement or sentence drives me nuts. How is it so transmissible? Listen, it's a respiratory illness, which means that it can hang out in the air. They've proven this for up to 8 minutes. In closed spaces with no airflow, that's a long flipping time. 8 minutes? It's a long time for something to be hovering in the air on dust particles. That's why it's so transmissible. The most transmissible diseases that the pandemic experts worry about are respiratory illnesses because we all have to breathe. And when we're talking, and you're infectious, you're putting out the virus. When you're coughing on something, when you're sneezing on something, when you're laughing, you're just, spit goes everywhere. So of course, that's why it's transmissible, because it's a respiratory illness. That's why it's so highly transmissible. Drives me nuts. They also go on to say in the article, the first part of the answer is that after much speculation of extreme transmissibility, Jesus, the data shows something intermediate, with each infected individual transmitting the virus between 2 or 3 others on average. Blows my mind, that statement. 2 or 3 others. Virus is transmissible between 2 or 3 others. That means the R naught is 2 or 3. One person infecting 2 or 3 others. That's kind of an exponential transmission rate, because if one person infects 2 others, those 2 infect 4 others, those 4 others infect 8 others, and so on and so forth. Actually, I think I did that wrong. Those 4 others infect up to 16 others. Like, you don't want the transmission rate to be anything above 1. If you R naught is what they call it, the transmission rate. If one person infects one person, that's bad. That means that it has the potential to have exponential growth. What we want is less than a 1. So in 1 in 10 people, at least 9 of them can infect someone else. But if there's at least one person that's not infecting someone, at least we know that the rate is going down every time, over and over and over again. But if it's go over 1, or if it's a 1-to-1 or over 1, then it's a real problem. So that statement right there, where each infected individual can transport or transmit the virus between 2 and 3 others on average, that's a huge problem. A huge problem. And they say that, but the important point that is often missed is that is just an average. Yeah, an average. That means that one person could infect 5 people. You don't want that at all. You don't want the average to be above 1. That is what the problem actually is. So this opinion, in my opinion, this is completely wrong. And that is a point of concern. The data shows that 9% of infected people are responsible for 80% of the transmissions. For one thing, the disease is apparently very infectious, but only for a short window. Just because it's infectious for a short window doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned about it. And this is another thing that bothers me, is that for me to get AIDS, for example, HIV, which is another huge problem, and she mentions it later, and that in the very beginning they told people to be celibate until they started talking about, safe sex and safe whatever. I'm going to come back to that. Remember that. Because this is respiratory, anyone can give it to anybody. I don't have to have sex with you to get it. I just have to stand next to you and you to be highly infectious and for me to breathe it in. And this is why masks are so important, right? Because what do? They prevent me from breathing out if I'm infectious, the virus. It traps the virus inside of the mask, hopefully. Even if I cough, most of it is going to get in here. It decreases my transmissibility by, I believe, 85 to 90% when you have a mask on. And if I have a mask on and you have a mask on, if some of it does get out, you have somewhat of a barrier to block what's going in. It's not 100%. I'm going to tell you that right now. It's not 100%. Not 100%, but it's a little bit of percent. It's more than 0%. So if it is airborne, there's droplets hanging out right here, and I happen to walk into it, they're going to get embedded into the mask, right? And the way that these viruses work, if their hydrogen bonds to begin to break in cloth substances, they get their hydrogen molecules detached and they break apart, and that's how the virus dies, right? So I would rather have that land in my mask. Maybe a couple get through, but most of it lands in my mask and gets killed. And then hopefully, when it gets into my system, it doesn't go and get lodged in my lungs. And either A, my immune system finds it first and kills it off, or B, I spit it out, or some other ways it gets out of my mouth or my nose and doesn't get fully integrated into my system. So if I wear a mask and you wear a mask, that decreases the transmission rate down to like 2% or possibility or less. And again, this drives me nuts because this virus has a 14-day incubation period. Like just because and we're opening up here in Germany and in other parts of the world, and people are just going right back to normal. Just because we're opening up doesn't mean the virus just disappeared. Like, we still need to give it another 1 or 2 weeks before we stop wearing masks. Like, everyone's got to chill a little bit. I know wearing masks doesn't make us look cool, doesn't make us look super handsome or pretty or whatever, but you got to set aside your fucking ego. Like, we're in the middle of a pandemic still. This is not just going away because the government says, hey, we're going to open up now and it's okay to go to the grocery store or whatever. It's driving me nuts, actually, absolutely nuts. So with that being said, the study also pointed out that the virus spreads often at business meetings and restaurants, which are now being opened up again. So I'm assuming that we're going to see an increase in cases again. And what else here? Much of the material in these studies comes as a surprise to people. Clearly it didn't come as a surprise to me. I think most of it is actually, again, information that's being correlated incorrectly. And then article says, I'd like people to stop worrying and wasting mental energy on the wrong things. Don't worry about going outdoors and bike riding since it's such a low risk. That I actually agree with. If you're outside, there's wind. It's knocking the virus around. It's gravity and wind are pulling it down to the ground faster, which means that if someone does cough nearby, either the wind will take the virus away, hopefully, or it'll fall faster because of the airflow. If you're in a closed space like this room, then there's going to be a problem because the virus will be hanging out in the air. And then again, at the end, they talk about AIDS and about safe sex. And so I'm coming back to that right now. This is safe sex. This is safe sex. If you're going outside, if you're doing whatever, for the next couple weeks, next 2-3 more weeks, you still wear a mask. My last point is the virus can't replicate outside of the human body. It can only replicate in cells in our body. That's it. So it's not going to replicate if it's just hanging out on a piece of cardboard or some steel. It only replicates once it gets in your body. So if we can help reduce transmission and help reduce the spread through things like masks until we have, I don't know, eventually we'll get vaccines and treatments and stuff. But until that point, if we can kill it off as much as possible, if we can kill off that virus as much as possible in the meantime, until we can, get the vaccine, get the whatever, then it can't replicate in our body, and hopefully it won't go extinct, but it will pretty much almost go away. If it dies out in the world, it's not coming back. It cannot just asexually replicate on a piece of wood. So okay. Last concerning part is that it can get into cats where it can replicate, and then we don't know if it can pass back to humans or not, but that's a whole nother story. So for the meantime, let's still be careful in semi-public, semi-crowded places like the gym, like the grocery store, like in business meetings, and wait another month or 2 or 3 weeks before we really have data on how the virus has been in control and where it's going. So that's it for today. I think this ended up being longer than I wanted it to because I got a little heated here, got a little excited. But this has been The Joe Show. If you like my content, subscribe to my channel. Follow me on Instagram, Joe Show, and send articles to me in person if you know me, or joeshow@gmail.com. And I'll see you tomorrow. In the meantime, read something good. This has been A Joe Show.